Welcome everyone to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. And Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined here by our editor, Theta, our local designer, Norman Rafferty, our good friend and GM, RedRabbit, and our continual guest and good friend, Lessons Learned. When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Lessons, why don't you go next?
Oh yeah, he, him. I am a regular GM here on every Sunday on Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern. Run Into the Wild Coast, Greyhawk 5th Edition adventure. I'm also dabble in game design with my continuing project called 2980, and I am a published author. My book collection of short stories is over Amazon, Night and Stars, and you can check it out. Check it out for 99 cents.
All right, Red, how about you?
Okay, I'm RedRabbit. I'm also a GM here on the channel. I'm running the Ironclaw game on Wednesday mornings. I also run Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition currently, and I like to consider myself a student of narrative and of game design.
And last but not least, Rafferty.
Hello world, I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for Sanguine Games, where we make Ironclaw and Farflung and Madcap and Vital Hearts and Urban Jungle and Bleeding Edge, a lot of games. We've made a lot of games. And so thank you. If you've seen our games, great. And if you haven't, they're great. You should check them out.
All right. And so if that's everyone then. So every now and then, I'll try to play a new board game or card game, and they tend to have like reasonably short rule books, and they're like about 20 pages long usually. It's not a whole lot, but if it's all dry instructional prose, and it can get kind of boring, and you just kind of want to start playing and go step by step. A lot of the time, I'll play a lot of these games once and then not return to like figure out the rest of it or dive any deeper. But some I'll end up playing for the next month with friends and having a great time. Ultimately, when it comes to those games, figuring out how to play has never been a barrier, but it could easily be the excuse for not wanting to play one of them that's not fun. When these games are fun, learning just kind of happens because you want to play it and ask questions about how it works. But when it comes to tabletop RPGs, people will constantly say that there's a learning tax to get people into the game. So today, let's talk about what this learning tax is and why maybe it's not exactly correct. So, Rafferty, you want to go ahead and kick this off as usual?
Well, so the phrase learning tax I first saw it in print from Ryan Dancy, who at the time worked for Wizards of the Coast as one of the evangelists for Dungeons and Dragons. Ryan Dancy may have been the biggest proponent for the open gaming license. Before D&D 3rd edition, TSR were the custodians of Dungeons and Dragons. They were very litigious. They didn't want anyone infringing on their trademark because, well, if you look today, it's worth millions of dollars, so they were right. So, but obviously people wanted to go ahead and make their own, add-ons to it. And getting a license was prohibitively expensive. So they came up with the idea of, we'll put the trademark separately and we'll go ahead and make something called SRD. By the way, D20 is trademarked, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
So Ryan Dancy came up with the theory that, the people have a hard time trying to get into a game because of the learning tax, which was his phrase, which is that it's too difficult for people to learn a new game. So, if we could just lower that bar, and maybe there should only be one game. And by coincidence, it should be the game that I own. And everyone should just play D20 for everything forever.
Yeah.
I know some people are going to say he didn't exactly say that. I said, no, he didn't exactly say that. But eventually things change. It's an interesting way of phrasing it, because a lot of times when people say, oh, I've got a new game and I'd like to get my friends to try it, but they don't want to play anything that isn't D&D.
Mm-hmm.
And my response to that would be, well, it's probably because these games are often presented as extremely difficult to get into. We are seeing a huge renaissance these days of a lot of indie games that are like one page, or even what they call zine games, which are like, they're 3 or 4 pages, where everything's on one character sheet. And you can immediately get into the game and immediately get to the fun. And like, this is a big change, because I guess the last thing I'll say is often you'll see, do we all know what a heartbreaker is?
Yes, I think
Covered
we
that
talked
once or
about it.
twice.
Maybe
I think we
go
met, well, for the benefit of new listeners, a heartbreaker is a game that you can see, like even just a video game or whatever, that you can tell the person who worked on it, they really loved it, they worked really hard on it, but holy crap, this game is so complicated and has so many moving parts and so much stuff. A lot of people look at D&D and they say, hey, I wish D&D had rules for what I wanted to do. So they copy all the rules over and add more on top of it, and then they make a game that's even more convoluted and complex. And so basically what the learning tack should be is if you want someone to play a new game, if you've got a new game that you want to play or make, you really have to find ways to make it accessible to new people, because there is going to be that breaking in period. And that's what I want to talk about today, because there are ways to design around that.
Yeah. And I like that like a lot of this started around like the D20 sphere of things, which I will say is notoriously hard to break into because there are 12 shelves worth of volumes of books for like 3.5 or 5th edition that you need to sort through in order to find like the thing that you want. It's research hell.
I mean,
Well,
I've seen, most of us probably seen the libraries. When I say the libraries, it's like
Mhm.
the closets, like the one I have here, full of books, about
Mhm.
usually D20 or AD&D or whatever it was. So it was like somebody looks at it, was like, I don't know where to start with this, right? What
Mhm.
what do
Well,
I do?
there's also one thing that people don't talk about, but we all know about, and that is there's a bigger deal than just the rule books. The big learning tax is learning what the table does, because
Mm.
you meet a lot of people who say, "Oh, the great thing about Dungeons and Dragons is you can make the game play any way you want. If you don't like the way something works, you can just change it." Not saying you can't do that, but that means that when someone comes to the table, if they've never gamed with you before, now they have to learn what all your house rules are. They don't
Mhm.
know that you've changed it so that archers can op attack at range, or you've decided that um, halflings get seduction as a racial ability. Things I've seen. So
Yeah.
if those are
Yeah.
things that are rules, and people have to figure that out, and that doesn't get a lot of discussion. Like you folks do. I mean, let's put Red on the spot. Sorry about this, Red.
Uh-oh.
But okay,
Yeah.
so you're running vampire games, and to mine, as far as I can tell, those games are very much you have to read the table and figure out, what goes and what doesn't, because the book itself is filled with lots of complicated rules that allow you to just overwhelm people with celerity and potence. But groups are usually a very different style than that. So I want to ask how you feel about learning what the table like.
Learning what the table likes. I mean, I come at it from a weird perspective because I'm the kind of guy who really does get off on the ridiculous rule complexity and will look at a rule in a book and say like, that doesn't really work, and then invent like a whole other rule system for it, and then put myself in the situation where I have to explain that to the group, and then the group goes like, I don't know. So, um, in terms of the learning tax, in terms of how I think people approach these games, I look at it from two perspectives. I think there's people who are excited by the rules, and there's people who are excited by the game, right? And I think the reason why this is such a pronounced issue is because in the history of role-playing games, there's usually like the person who finds the game and gets excited about it and learns all the rules, and then is inevitably faced with the issue of needing to convince another group of people to learn those rules too, so that they'll have someone to play with, right? Um, and you have to present this like, hey, check out this textbook. You don't have to read all of it, but you do have to read most of it, and then we can play this game, and I promise you it's really fun. And I think that's why we're even having this conversation, is that it's intrinsic to the role-playing game hobby that you have people who want to play these games because they love their design, and you have people who want to play these games because they like playing make-believe with their friends, and there's a weird tension between the two groups. And that's a tension that I've struggled with myself for a very long time. But I think I feel like I probably didn't answer your question. At the end of the day, no matter what kind of rules you prep, it's the rules that you come up with at the table to solve problems that you and your friends have at the table. Those are going to be the ones that stick. So it does make it difficult for new players to join, especially when you don't have a universal set of rules that you can all just depend on. as is the case with D&D.
Right. I mean, I would argue that that's the paradox of the game because that weakens it. Because, for example, we could just show up and, I mean, if anyone came to the chat before we started this, we can just sit here and bullshit or role play. You can role play without rule books. People do it all the time.
Yeah.
The entire purpose of the rule book is to tell you, what goes and what doesn't. For example, I might show up and say, I'm a vampire and I go out during the sun because all it does is make me sparkle. Also, I go to high school for 100 years. And you would explain to me, no, this is Vampire the Masquerade. Here is a book that says the sun will destroy you because you're all from the legacy of Cain. Our vampires are different. Here's a book. And so the idea of the book explains what goes and what doesn't. And every time we do a house rule, we raise that learning tax because that means I can't just go read the book or read stuff online and figure out how this is supposed to work to get me more involved with it. I have to sit there and have social skills to read what's going on at the table about what goes on and what doesn't. I'm not saying you can't do that, I'm saying you are doing that.
Yeah. So, and your point there is that as much as we might think the learning tax is an issue of rule complexity in the book, it's actually something that accumulates. If the rules in the book are not strong enough or elegant enough, then you will get other rules that kind of cling to that base set like barnacles. And those are even harder because there's no universal repository for them. Those you have to learn by playing the game with people. So that's I hadn't considered that before.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I got very down on games like Fate or GURPS, which say they're generic rule systems. But the problem is because there's hundreds of pages of rules, that turns into rules lawyering because someone showed up and said, well, okay, so I put all my points in shooting and hit everyone in the head. Okay, well, we have to ban anyone with a shooting skill above +5 or excellent or whatever they call it. So our group has banned that. So if someone else shows up and tries to do that, we have to tell them no. And then the groups start to get whittled down and banned. And then you'll get grandfathering. We'll say, okay, we told that guy he could buy shooting +5 and he already has it. And we can't take it away from him because he already has it. But new players can't.
But new players can't. And that's extra shitty.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. So the last thing I'll say on this topic, and then I'll turn the floor over, is that because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, specifically with D&D, I've been thinking about advertising new game ideas that I've had, and I realize at this point that with 5th edition, the way that I want to play is definitely different enough from the core in the book, and very far from sort of the massively agreed upon house rulings in the book, that it's the kind of thing where even just sort of trying to advertise a game becomes very complicated. It's like it's a struggle to express exactly what game I want to play without having paragraphs of rule clarifications and things like that. So yeah, it is a problem definitely that I'm struggling with currently.
And that's the paradox of that's why, for any old school people, that's why the paradox of the learning tax, the idea, well, what if we boil it down to where there's only one game that fits all? And like you just described, you can't make one game that fits all. People who come to Dungeons and Dragons have certain expectations, and the mere act of removing those expectations, we've got a Ship of Theseus problem. It's a different game now.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
What do you think, Lessons?
Well, to that question is how far can you hack a game until you hack it to pieces, right? Stop seeing whatever it is that you thought that it was. But going back to the point that Red started with, it seems to me that the question is one of does the elevator pitch meet the game actually meet the expectations of the elevator pitch? Because getting people on the table, if you got a good pitch, right? I don't know, your rebels in this near future fight against mega corporations, you're probably going to find 4 or 5 people that want to do that. And then you open the book and it's all about basically stealing money, from your grandma, and it's like, well, I don't want to do that, That's not something I want to do. And I have to learn rules about how to steal money from, the guy down the street or the middle management who would just try to survive and trap in these mega corporations, but I never actually do anything against the mega corporations. There's no way.
Yeah, you can get bait and switched on it.
Yeah, so, it's like pitching a Harry Potter adventure for D&D. It's like, but D&D is about going out and killing monsters, not doing ball dances. I could do a ball dance, and have gowns in the middle of the campaign, but that's not the thing that gets you to D&D, because D&D will hand you a sword or a wand or a spell. It's like, you at this level, you're going to do X amount of damage and kill many goblins. That's what you're supposed to do in D&D. So the elevator pitch doesn't do that, and that sort of starts in video games, it will be the learning curve, right? It starts ramping it up. It's almost looked like a wall, like, okay,
Well, it's exactly the thing I talk about when we talked about in previous talks about trying to force something. Like, I'm always fond of harping on D&D can't do a murder mystery. Because, like you just said, in order to do a murder mystery in D&D, I would have to start removing stuff. Like, well, we can't raise the guy from the dead, so I got to come up with a reason for that. We can't speak with the dead, or if we did, he can't give us anything useful, so we have to nerf that. We can't use augury or those kinds of ability. In other words, you're already altering the rules of the game, because this is stuff that would solve our problem that's in the book. And we got to start removing anything that could be a one-stop solution, because we want it to be a mystery and we want folks to investigate. But in effect, what you're doing is you're making things harder on the players, because people who like, well, I know this stuff works. I came to play D&D, and D&D is this supposed to be this thing. So it's possible to work and hammer those out and remove those. But I guess in the process, your players are wasting time learning what works and what doesn't. It's the learning tax all over again. You invited them to play this game, but we're going to do something different with it. Not that you can't do that, but if some of your players might not have buy-in for this. They might have said, I came because I was promised the monster killing and looting experience. That's what the advertising said. So I got to learn that you want to do all this differently, and some people will get upset. That's like effectively false advertising.
I'm going to give you a little personal story how I got into role playing. I mean, and it kind of matches also how I got into video games as well. Like in the 80s, if you go back to play a lot of games in the 1980s, they're almost nigh impossible to play, because they instantly kill you, or they're very simplified, right? They were built for a Commodore 64 with one button joystick, and you had to have a cardboard cutout to tell you what all the buttons did. So if you were a kid like me in the summer in 1989, had nothing better to do, I could spend endless hours, trying to figure out how this helicopter flies and doesn't crash into a mountain. Today, you tell, okay, let's fly this flight simulator. I was like, I just crashed into a mountain. I'm just going to go playing back Stardew Valley, because that's easier for me to play, right? And for me, it took me about 6 months playing just Adventures in Dragons to literally have that switch where I went from there's our rules and dice and whatever, like, oh, I am embodying a character. Now, maybe I'm extremely slow learner, but I'm sure it has happened to other people where like they're in the sessions like, what do you mean I'm an archer? What do you mean I'm this, right? So that could be part of it. It's like getting into the mindset of playing the game can be a problem into itself, right? Because we are so used to say, oh yeah, you pretend to be this person. You're like, what does that mean? I'm not an actor. I'm not this. How do I get into that mindset? And that can be part of the learning curve. Because if it doesn't click with you, then it doesn't. But once it did, I was fine. But it took me about 6 months. I don't think most people don't have that kind of patience. I was just so nerdy enough that I just like, well, I really want to play Dungeons and Dragons, so I'm going to keep doing this because this sounds like it would be fun for me, but most people go like, yeah,
it's good you're a persistent fellow, but like a lot of these things are built on abstraction, and it's very possible to not understand what the abstraction is or what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah, and definitely I would love to compare computer games to role-playing games, because a lot of people's first experience will be a computer game. In like a modern computer game, especially an MMO, they or we could go back to the D&D basic set, the Moldvay version of 83. They started you with a basic set of abilities. You are a first level character. Here's your sword. Here's initiative. Here's how to stab things. Here's a spell. Start someone with something very basic. This is probably why you see the OSR revival. And then as the game went on, they would introduce you to more and more complex concepts. Like if you play World of Warcraft, they say, okay, WSD to move. Can you figure this out? Okay, good. Now we'll bother to explain clicking on things to kill them, because we know you can actually move to where they are. This sounds like basic stuff, but there's like every game is someone's first game. So that slow introduction of the rules over time, the idea that experience, like Lessons just said, it used to be that the games were roguelike, that you started with a character and you might get killed instantly. So the goal was, how far can I get before I'm killed? In modern games, we expect that players will not die. The expectation is you will probably live. And they keep making resurrection cheaper and easier. You'll live. So now experience is a function of time. I want to start out as the level 20 adventurer. I want to start off throwing fireballs and meteor swarms. But no, they're going to make me start, with Ray of Frost. So over time, if I can survive long enough and put enough investment in the campaign, I'll get good enough to cast these meta huge level spells. So in theory, the game should start off really simple and introduce to me the basic concepts. And then as I level up, I should learn more and more stuff. Here's how an area of effect works. Here's spells that might have stacked effects over time. Here's delaying spells. Here's crafting items. I should learn those stretched out over time. And that would be an excellent idea. I see that in computer games, which is why I'm a little disappointed that a lot of games take the opposite approach, because they're like me. Give them everything at the start. It's Linux for everybody. And throw every rule at you at the beginning. And then you're just kind of scared or confused or worried you're going to do a trap build or something like that. And so there are some games that are doing the approach now of slowly introducing all of the meta rules. And I think that's like a lot of PBTAs and BITDs are looking on that approach. And I think that's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's one I wanted to bring up, the PBTA games, because our premise here is that the learning tax doesn't exist if you're just already playing having fun. And the way a lot of PBTA seems to be designed is that you just pick up your character sheet and you're already ready. You don't really need to do very much more. With the playtest that we did on Wednesday, I had 3 choices and I'm ready to go. If I want to put upon myself to understand a rule, I could choose the more complicated thing, or I could choose the simple thing and just start out simple. And that's my choice to go ahead and do. I can choose, am I going to make this harder for myself? And even if I do or don't, I'm already playing the game. I didn't have to do very much for it.
Yeah, but I think I mentioned this before, that many, even today, a lot of, and we were talking, we look at the rules, we were playing Wednesday, it has that section where it's like, if you never played a role-playing game, and if you have, right? And it's, again, it happens in other, like science fiction, for example, and speculative fiction, when many writers start spouting about faster than light travel, and most people are like, what does that mean? Oh, it means that you go very fast. But they never heard about the term FTL, right? So that can throw them off.
And someone out there probably might not know that light has a limit to its speed.
Or not, more like a term like FTL, like, the ship engage FTL, and you're like, what does that? What do you mean engage FTL? Does it make the ship go boom, or does it disappear, or what do you mean, right? What do you mean when you say that, if at all? And people who read a lot of time sci-fi, it's like, it's faster than light travel. Maybe warp.
They don't use the word FTL in Star Trek or Star Wars. It's warp speed or hyperspace. Okay,
hyperspace, light speed, or whatever. Yeah.
I'm glad Red's back, because once again, one of the exceptions to the idea of being rules heavy was Vampire, because I know that Vampire is not the only game that does this, but in Vampire, when you create your character, they have a long list of questions to ask of who you are, where you come from, what your motivation is, to try and get you into the game. So I wanted to ask Red, your more contemporary experiences with Vampire. How do you feel like Vampire is really good about getting new people into the game, especially ones that are here for the experience, not for the gameism? So, what are your experiences with that?
I have definitely been pigeonholed as the vampire guy. I mean, I knew, I should have known it was happening, but I just realized this moment that it has happened.
You have more positive experiences with the game than a grognard like me does, and I want to be fair here, because I think Vampire has a lot to recommend it, and so that's why I thought you'd have some insight on it.
Right. Well, and I appreciate that. And I will say I always feel a little bit underprepared when you ask me, because I do have just a very single perspective on the game. Basically, having run it and I don't really engage in a lot of actual plays. I'm learning a lot of the lore for the first time. I will say probably the advantage there in something like a Vampire is that it is a game that does put a lot of emphasis on who your character is, and maybe slightly less on their on their capabilities, at least compared to something like a Dungeons and Dragons, where when you boil a D&D character down, it really is just a set of abilities, options that you can do, largely in combat. But I think for people who, what I've found, and we actually just added a new player to our vampire game too, who's also new to 5th edition, what I've found is that I think it's a good system because it encourages people to think of their characters as characters first, as, you know, how do they relate to this world that we've created before you worry about how effective they'll be in combat, what niche role they'll fill, how unique they'll be compared to the other characters. And I think that is a good thing. Honestly, I feel like it's still not quite at the level of Powered by the Apocalypse game, which I feel like solves the problem. And Griff kind of mentioned this, but I feel like those games solve the problem by just basically, you don't need the rules. You have all the rules in front of you, and the GM will tell you when you need to know, what you need to roll and what it means. And if there's any question, then usually it's because the answer's right in front of you.
That sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Red. It seems that there's two approaches, right? Vampire style games want you to be invested in your character. And because you're invested, like I was when I was invested, I really wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, so I kept at it, right? Or I wanted to play that video game, I really want to keep at it. Versus other games, it's like, we don't know your level of investment, mostly because you don't know, what you're doing. You might not, this might be your first role-playing game. So we're not going to demand a lot of investment for you. As long as you sit on the table and you're willing to play with friends and throw some dice and follow some basic instructions, that's fine. And if that seems something that you're enjoying, hey, having fun, then you will want to keep on doing it, right? That seems to be, Are there distinct approaches, or I'm just making a distinction that's not really there?
No, actually, I really like that distinction. And I think that I'm going to go a step further and start to map player personality types onto them too. Because I mentioned earlier, I think there's people who get really excited by the rules, by the character options, by the depth of the game. And then I think there's other people who really, they understand that they don't know everything there is to know yet. They don't want to worry about trap builds. They don't want to worry about, the nitty gritty of initiative and combat and things. They want to start playing and then see, and they don't have to invest as much. And I think that you made a great point. I think I kind of like the Powered by the Apocalypse approach because you can literally sit down at the table with next to no knowledge. And as long as you're a little patient, maybe 10 minutes of describing like what you're seeing on the character sheet, and then asking them some fun questions like, how would you describe your character's eyes or their wild hair, right? Then you're playing the game. But I have seen people who are actually turned off by that too. And I think they're the players who want that depth. When they look at the character sheet and they say, oh, there's maybe like 4 important decisions to make, and then this character is already made. They feel no ownership, or they feel like the game is going to be shallow or simple. And they're really attracted to the 15 splat books. They're attracted to, the knowledge that there's a deep combat system to tinker with, and that their character could be min-maxed to the point where it gets to be ridiculous. And for those people, I'm sure sitting down to like a dungeon world is kind of like, this is just kind of bland. It's kind of simple.
Well, I mean, this is my snark. I'm fond of saying that the best-selling World of Darkness book of all time has the title Combat.
That's pretty funny.
So, I mean, I'm very much like that person. It's like, I go, hey, cool, I love this like new set of rules and the way like this machine moves, and I'd like to move it around more and see what it does. Because it's fun to see how that goes back into the abstraction, which is where we have and it's representing like a vampire character. It's fun to see what that means for the people in that universe, and that's how I kind of approach it. I think.
I'm seeing a problem here because, and Red mentioned this earlier, that you have basically the people that are collectors, people who just buy all these books and they're like, one day I will play this with my friends. They're very excited. They're the ones who want to get into the rule sets. Usually they're the people who will want to have all the options because they're reading the books and seeing, okay, if I do this, then I can move here and shoot this over there, and this person will be, I don't know, do that. And, and someone who's coming new to the table might go like, okay, so if I roll the die and I roll this number, what happens? Right? I mean, you can have that golf, right? It's like, what does a 15 mean? Or what is like I got snake eyes. What does that mean? Right? and you can have a huge gap between them. And we go back to an older episode that we had where it's like play other games, because it might be a simple question of not every game is for every player, right? You may want to start them with something like Powered by the Apocalypse, where your dungeon world, and then go like, yeah, okay, that was fine, but I want something better or more complex. Because I was watching something and somebody was able to throw, like a meteor swarm someone else. Like, can I do this in this game? Like, no, but this other game might let you to do that. Or they might be playing that game. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to stick around to level whatever, 29, to just throw some fireballs. I just want to whack a goblin.
Right.
And throw 2d6s, right? Yeah, so.
This is a wonderful point, and I think we've even kind of gone over it before in another talk of ours, where we're like, yeah, you want to talk with the people at your table, what do they want, and try to find that fit. And if you're just going to go ahead and say, we're just playing D&D at them, like, half of them are probably going to drop off because that's not what they were kind of interested in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's where the myth of the learning tax comes from, because usually it's if someone showed up to play D&D, a lot of times someone would say, hey, I want to introduce a new game, and I'm so pro gaming, I love rules. Rules are great. And so they're going to show up with something that's D&D, but more rules.
I'm going to show up with GURPS.
Right, and they're not going to be able to, or Fate, and they're not going to be able to explain those properly. They're going to throw a 400-page rulebook at people, or a 200-page accelerated. Oh, that's better. And try to get everyone into that and wrap their brains around mechanics, when a lot of people probably came to the table before because they were intrigued by the role-playing aspect. Vampire sells itself on the role-playing. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're seeing here is, to get us a little sidetracked a little bit, there's basically three things you have to learn to play a game. First, you have to learn, or one thing you eventually have to learn is a basic understanding of the rules that are in play. And that could be what's in the book. So you have to learn that. You have to learn basically what people want at the table. Most vampire groups will gravitate towards experiential social stuff, define themselves as Malkavians or Bruja, and the social interactions and the saga of the city. So that's kind of, you have to learn what those people enjoy and what they don't. Some people have different boundaries than others. Why we have X cards and that kind of stuff. But the third thing that you're going to have to learn, of course, is what house rules and what people at this specific table enjoy. Because just obviously there are grognards out there who enjoy high levels of combat and crunch. And obviously there are casual players who enjoy role-playing and experiential stuff. But what's your table want? Like, who came to this table today? That's the people we have to entertain. Now, there are some games that have what they call a zero session, where they have everyone sit down and describe the kind of campaign we're going to make and have people set stuff up. And I think that's a big step towards overcoming that learning obstacle. That let's have a session where we sit down and talk to each other about our expectations of the game. And I think a lot more games could benefit from something like that. I'm not a fan of I just said games benefit from that. I'm not a fan of those, but I'm terrible, because I would rather get in there and start playing and see what goes and what doesn't. But I've also come into the game with an expectation of my first session is my learning experience. This is where I learn what goes and what doesn't. And I think there's a lot of hype behind the game saying, this is a world of imagination. You can be a vampire or a swordsman. You can be whatever you want. No, you can't. That's never true. You have to show up at the table and find out what everyone else wants to do and then work with them. That performative bug that I've been on. And that's, I think, really you start introducing people to the idea that you're here to help everyone out.
Yeah. So bringing back another aspect, because these conversations are ongoing. I think this is also a matter, at least from the design perspective, having a very clear design and opening statement in your game. Like when somebody opens that book, tell them what it's really about.
This is a game about X.
Yeah, because telling that you can do everything, you're creating an expectation that you can do everything. And then when they keep reading, it's like, but I can't be a dancing dwarf on the top of the mountain, when my shillelagh is like, because it's, unless you make a druid that's a dwarf that was in the jungle, and it's like, no, I can't do that, right? Or it's very difficult to do that, or it's a trap bill, whatever, right? If you make a clear statement and go like, well, this sounds like a nice read, sorry, I'm going to pass. And I think the problem with that, of course, is if you're selling a product, you don't want anybody to close the book and go, well, I guess I'm not going to buy this book. I'm not going to give you my X amount of dollars.
Nail right in the head.
Thank you for telling me off.
Yeah, the game doesn't want to tell anybody. D&D wants to be everything to everybody. They don't want to tell anybody they don't want to do this. By the way, here's 400 pages of combat rules. My favorite. I like to harp on the statement in D&D Second Edition that says D&D is not a combat game. Which is such a loaded statement the more you read into it, because it's you can force it to do other things, but forcing it to do other things is going to make it even more difficult to learn. Games should have a mission statement of what they want to be, and then they want to be that, because anytime you're straying from the core idea of your game, you're forcing players to think a bit more. And it's not that they might not be up for the challenge, but you'd have to kind of explain that. That's why I'm constantly harping on the streamed games and the Mercer effects and that sort of thing. Those actors that are up there are trained to accept, okay, this has gone off the rails of what I've expected this game to be, but I'm an improvisational actor, so I'm going to roll with it in front of the cameras. Mm-hmm. And if we told our players that's what you're supposed to do, that would be fine. But many players have come from the game being told, this is a book full of rules. You don't want to be a rule breaker, do you? So we just need to get away from that.
Yeah, and also I think, and you mentioned a lot of times Mulvey, because one of the things about Mulvey was that it was designed to get people to play the game. And I think a simple statement would be something like, let's be honest, in your book, whatever session, I never really seen anybody say this in a book. Maybe I haven't read enough role-playing games, saying, don't worry, you will learn by doing, you will learn by playing, and write a book that goes into that. Because unless you start, you can read as many RPGs as you want, and I always say nothing exists until it hits the table, meaning that until you start playing with other people, you don't know if that rule is actually going to work, or if you're even going to use it, or they can actually it's going to be a trap build, right? You can get the sense from reading it, but there's a point where you have to actually play it. And I think that's where, part of the learning curve here, it's a problem, because when you start actually implementing and rolling die and making your builds or following the instructions, you're like, it's like being losing that nice bolt when you buy something from IKEA. It's like, so DE goes into FI? What does that mean? It was nice in the store. When you put it in your house, it's like, what? And then you're stuck with it, So that can happen if you don't have a clear design purpose. It's like, I'm going to teach everybody. And people, people, you just put in a statement like, if you know how this works, skip ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of a game that has a lot of rules and a lot of depth, but that does present it in a way that's like a video game tutorial type thing, where you're going to learn by playing. And I do think that's distinct from, again, your games that basically say, hey, we're just going to literally start playing, and you don't have to, here's a couple sort of superficial decisions to make up front, but then we're just playing the game. I'm thinking, and it jogged my memory because I see that, I guess Raph has, I love your joke about the table being big enough for a Fantasy Flight game. There are two games that have starter sets that I've played that were both more modern, more recent Fantasy Flight games. They did one for their latest Star Wars game, and one for their Legend of the Five Rings game. And I played both of them, and I didn't really think about it at the time, but it is pretty much what that is, what I've just described. They're both fairly crunchy games that are obviously trying to compete with like your Dungeons and Dragons. But they come with starter adventures, which a lot of games do. But I feel like in these cases, very specifically, they come with pre-generated characters that aren't just like standard out of the box, like here's the fighter and the paladin and the cleric, but they come with characters that also have like character. They've got backstories and personalities to them. And the adventures themselves are structured to showcase the different types of encounters that you might have at the table, and then also teach the person running the game how they should handle those encounters. And I guess that's just a really long way of me saying that, like, I liked that. I didn't realize at the time that's what they were doing, but I think that's a cool approach that definitely isn't standard to large named RPGs these days, I don't think.
Yeah, not these days. No, I think well, because the D&D guys hired outside people. There's one before Mold Day who I never, because I'm always on the Mold Day's my version, where they realized their game was incomprehensible to outsiders. And so that's why people have a lot. That's why Osric, OSR became popular, because it's like, no, people, that's the version people remembered.
Mhm.
And no, I think you're absolutely right that I don't. I'm right now on the kick of, I think if we're going to acknowledge that we're going to have house rules, then we need to have icebreaker situation. Like people, I always thought this is weird. People talk about my games being unusual, that we build a debriefing into the game beats. We say, like, at the end of every session, just ask everyone who their face is. Hey, did you like the game?
Mhm.
Is there anything we could do better?
Yeah.
Because
Prompting people to have that social conversation where if they're not picking it up, that you just say it out loud.
right, because these games are intimidating. So because I've run into people who say, like, yeah, I hear about these role-playing games, but I'm too dumb to learn how a role-playing game is played. Which is a weird statement, because it's like, these guys just stand around and make crap up. You can just make crap up. Everyone can do that. But no, the reason why they say that is because a bunch of people quoted a bunch of numbers and didn't explain what was going on. And, heaven forbid you should try to read up on these, because what was going on at the table is everyone's house rules. Sometimes people even know they're using house rules. The game master told them to do something and they did it.
Mhm.
Because I've run into a lot of people where I started asking them about this stuff, like, oh, you're not doing this, you're house ruling everything.
I mean,
That's
yeah.
going on in there. And so by asking, but it's okay to house rule. I want to say it's okay. But the idea that we're all asking each other, what do you want to do? I don't see a lot of games actually asking people what they want to do. A game like Vampire Presents to you is like, no, do you want to be these vampires? This is what you want. Or D&D Presents says, no, you want to be an adventurer who goes around killing things. Choose good or evil. It doesn't.
Mhm.
It presents like this is all you would ever want to do. They don't spend a lot of time discussing, different options of what you might pursue with the character or what you might want to get out of the game. I don't see that a lot. And I think if we spent more time asking people about that, there's some responsibility on the group to help each other learn what's going on.
Yeah, I
Right.
would also say that also part of teaching the game is also teaching how to run the game, which is, game master, dungeon master, what I call it, and maybe have a few statements. For example, if you have your starter adventure, some people do this, some people don't. I don't see as much as I would like to see it. Is like, why did the designer made the decisions that they made? Because you're supposed to run this adventure and tell you how to run a game, typical game, and the players are supposed to learn how to run the game, how to play the game, playing the adventure. That's why it's introducing adventures. Like, for example, why do you have, I don't know, I'm going to throw an example from me when I've been writing about this stuff. I gave the adventure a MacGuffin, and I explained that MacGuffin is information, meaning that it could be whatever you need, whatever piece of information you need, your players need to do for you as a game master to continue from this adventure, right? If you want them next to go to chase of pirates, then this is a piece of information that says where the pirates are. If they're going after a big corporate, that tells them a clue about that, right? That kind of information in a little sidebar might be very important. It's like, oh, okay, I can use stuff that is not strictly in the rules per se. It's like more common language of, writing stories and stuff like that. I can use that in my game, like having a MacGuffin. I don't have to write the rule that says, thou shalt have a MacGuffin. But if I use a MacGuffin, I explain what it is.
Mhm.
And that's a good example. So when they go like, maybe I can use this as a tool, and they don't creating my own adventures or modifying them, which is also, I think, important.
Well, another reason why I say there needs to be a lot of buy-in is because we've said this in other discussions. If you change the rules, okay, you've confused a player. Like, hey, I was told that when I stab someone, they take damage, and you just had the bad guy run away. I know I did enough critical hit to kill him, but you said he lived anyway and ran away. Now I don't understand the rules anymore. I thought I had learned this game, and now I don't. And so I'm not saying that GMs can't do that sort of thing, but every time a GM invokes fiat like that, or changes the rules, that's the player has to shift from learning how the game works to learning how the table works. And that gets into a more toxic attitude of where, the player came for a specific experience. They were expecting. They probably even learned that, hey, I'm supposed to be, a powerful vampire lord or a swordsman or a magician, and I get to do stuff in this game. And you just told me that doesn't happen because it wasn't appropriate for the story or you didn't feel like it or whatever. So now, either I have to learn what goes and what doesn't and roll with that, which is what your professionals do, critical roles and stuff. Or you might have a player who came in not because they're getting paid, but because they came here to have fun. And now they learned that what they thought was true is now false. And that is not a happy experience for a lot of players. That, wait, I thought this would happen, and now you're telling me no, it didn't. And if we don't discuss that or present that as learning what goes and what doesn't is part of the fun. If we didn't explain that we're all learning together and that's what we do, if we present it like it's a tax, it's a burden, it's like death, it's terrible. If we present learning as bad, you don't want to learn anything, then, we're just setting up time bombs for people to get sick and leave the game later.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's one thing I want to come back around to, and that's like the icebreaker for when you start the game, like the first session. And I think there's not enough value around that like first session. Because like when I start playing a game, I come in with like no idea of like what I'm really doing with a character. I just kind of roll with it until I find out what the vibe is with everyone else. So there needs to be something enough for people to interact with the table to, get that feel with everyone else. But on top of that, we've been talking about like learning the system and seeing what it's about and making sure you know the rules. And I think maybe people don't like know how to set up that kind of vertical slice of a game and what it represents and like how to sort that out and present it to people. Because like you see it a lot in video games that they'll set up like a vertical slice demo of like, all right, here's our game. You're going to be shooting things. There's going to be demons. There's going to be a jetpack and platforming section. And then there's puzzle bosses. And you'll see like a quick demonstration of each of those. But like a lot of first sessions that I've seen people like construct on their own is like, well, you're going to go into the cave. You're going to fight 6 kobolds. There's a little treasure. And then, whatever. And that's not really engaging, and there's not like a lot of hints about how to present that.
And thanks for reminding me why I hate zero sessions, because what happens when a player shows up after you already did that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other side of it, Griff, is you also have the session 0 where everyone spends the entire session just making jokes in the tavern, and that's just as useless. If you only get to the mechanics of the game on the second or third session, and then suddenly people realize like, oh yeah, this isn't actually very fun. That's also a problem.
Oh well,
yeah.
I
found, like, at least in terms of session 0, the most useful thing I found for session 0 is biding time so that you can go and prepare session 1.
Well, I think that's, speaking of learning, the value of the session 0 is so you can talk with the players and learn what it is they want to do. Like if everyone showed up at your party with chaotic evil fighters, you're going to have a different game than if everybody showed up with lawful good druids. So, is to read and get some idea. This, of course, assumes you know how to read that. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. I'd like to think that every game is playable and fun. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement here. As we run out the clock here, that it's not that learning is not fun. It's that we need to accept that there's different things. It's not just the rules that are a problem. It's learning about the setting and learning about your group and learning about what goes and what doesn't. And actually learning about what we enjoy and the stories we like to tell is actually part of the role-playing fun.
Yeah. I think that's like a really good concluding statement too. Does anyone want to follow that up?
No, it's perfect.
I mean, I agree with it. I'm all about
You're
it.
too good.
I think I'll double down on it though, and I'll say that I think everybody, or most people, I think, do actually enjoy that discovery, whether or not they're conscious of it. And even people who profess to hate all of the rules in RPGs, they're still like learning the rules in a group of friends while you play the game is fun. It is literally a big part of the game. So if there was a way to like highlight that more, or I think like Rafferty said, if there was a way to make that an expectation from the beginning in the books, I think that would do a lot of credit, or I think that would help people, approach games.
Yeah. And just to confirm, Lessons, any last thing you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of how do you matching your pitch with your actual game, right? If you have a strong pitch and your game fills that fulfillment, then I think people will be willing because they have buy-in, they have investment in the game. It's like, this is what I want. This game is doing mostly of what I want, and I'm having fun with my friends. So, like the title says, I'm going to keep going because I want to see what happens more. They might get disappointed and angry a little bit later, but at least you have them at the beginning, and there's greater chance that they'll stay in the table if they're having fun.
All right. So I think that'll go ahead and be a wrap for this episode of Notes from the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games on the same channel, and you can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty here is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com and join us on the Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Corals on Color expansion book, where you can have your own pirate adventures. Don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for his game over at startplayinggames.com as RedRabbit. And Lessons, give me your stuff real quick too.
You can find me on YouTube. I'm working on a Lessons Mass Effect Legendary Edition bridge version over at Lessons Learn YouTube channel, and also you can find me on streaming Monday to Friday on Lessons Learn 1. The 1 is important over at Twitch, here in Twitch, and on Sundays you can find me here with the Ractus gang, Theta gang, running them ragged through the city of Greyhawk as they come up with wacky situations and dangerous monsters that I keep tweaking and changing the rules on them.
Yeah, there we go.
See whether our turtle friend will pull a strange card from the deck come Sunday.
Oh boy. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Till next time.
Bye.